friends, my name is Dasha. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about the most surprising books of 2020. So I don't know about you guys, I go into books with not really high expectations most of the time, but not really low ones. But sometimes there's some books that just come and are not quite what you expected and they sweep you off your feet, and that's what I want to talk about, something a little more positive, you know? So these are the books that I don't know what I expected from, but they end up being better than I expected, and they're not necessarily favorites or like the most amazing books of the year in most of the case, but they were definitely not quite what I expected, and they were a lot better than I expected them to be, if that makes any sense. Not sure, but let's get into them. The first book I want to talk about is World War Z by Max Brooks. This is a kind of sci-fi dystopian, sometimes classified as horror book about the world if zombies had taken over, and it's told in basically little interviews with people from various parts of the world. And this blew me away. I expected this to be like every other zombie book, apocalyptic book, and it just had so much humanity somehow injected into it, and it felt so personal and so real that at times I had to stop and remind myself that it was a work of fiction and the stuff didn't happen ever. And just the writing style of this was unlike anything I'd read from any kind of sci-fi dystopian. It was not as heavy on the horror elements as I thought it would be based on what everyone was saying about it, and it was definitely more focused on real people and also military maneuvers, which was really cool for me anyways. I love all things military warfare. I study it in school. I am a huge fan of anything like historical warfare, maneuvers, tactics. I love that kind of stuff. So this book was so up my alley, and I did not expect it to be that way. And I just felt like I'd gone through like an experience when I finished it, and I didn't expect it. It was fantastic. I have my wrap up where I talk about this linked right up here if you want to go check out kind of more in-depth thoughts, but I pretty much say the same thing because I think I was still shocked after I finished it at how much I truly enjoyed this and how it wasn't what I expected at all. The next book I want to talk about is Kilo by Toby Muse. This is a nonfiction account of the Colombian cocaine wars, and this one absolutely touched me in ways I didn't expect. So I thought this was going to be, when I picked it up, just kind of a very to the point, in-depth overview of how the production of cocaine happens in Colombia, and I knew that he was going to follow certain players within the cocaine game, but I did not expect to be so impacted by this book. Again, the wrap-up where I talk about this will be linked up here, and I kind of went on a tangent in there because I just felt that book so deeply for some reason. How do I put this? Listen, this book just makes you realize that, you know, when you're at a club and you see your friends buying a little baggie of cocaine, you don't realize that to get to there's all these other things that have to happen, and until it's staring you in the face, you don't realize the impact of your actions or their actions. And I think that's what blew me away the most, was seeing that it's not just a little baggie of cocaine on a fun night out. It is a lot of struggle. It's a lot of political turmoil, you know, military turmoil, a lot of death, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of loss. And it's heartbreaking, but it is so impactful. And I think another thing that really blew me away is that obviously I wanted to read it because I know it's an ongoing conflict, but I felt like it reminded me that like we see these big tragedies in the news, we see big events, and obviously we do need to focus our attention on those when people need it immediately, but we don't realize that behind the scenes there's still stuff happening in other countries. And it just really opened my eyes to make me realize that there is these continual struggles, and we have it so good where we are, and then we just kind of pretend that it doesn't exist when we, you know, go buy an 8-ball of coke off our friend. But behind it, there's all these things that are still happening. And it ties back to the idea that like there are so many consequences to our actions. And I think this book kind of opened my eyes to that because it was real accounts of farmers and policemen and coast guards and all the people kind of involved in it. And it was just really, really fascinating to see it from such like a personal perspective, and I really didn't expect to be impacted the way that I was from this book, to be quite honest with you. The next book I want to talk about was a recent read in November, and that is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. So this is a fantasy novella following a girl who arrives at Eleanor West's home for wayward children, and all of these children have been through portals to get into other worlds, and basically when they come back into the real world, they don't know how to adjust, they don't know how to cope. So this book follows a new arrival at this school, and I don't want to say much more than that because it's so short, but I guess because I saw this book everywhere in the series, I just didn't know exactly what to expect, but I thought because it was so short, I wasn't going to be able to get invested into it, and I was a little worried that I would not enjoy it. But I wanted to give it a shot anyways, obviously, and I did, and I actually quite loved it. I thought that the characters were so sweet. I really enjoyed following them, and I would have gladly followed them in like a slice of life novella about just the school and how they go about their therapy sessions and how they go about, you know, their sleepovers and when new students come in. And it was just these really small details about the characters and about the school that made it so likable. Now, this wasn't like a favorite book of all time. It's not one of the best books I've ever read, but I gave it a 4 stars because I thought it was really fun. And again, the characters blew me away, and the plot is obviously not the strong point when there's such a small book, but I thought that the world that Seanan McGuire was able to create in such a small space and the characters that she was able to develop felt so unique but well fleshed out, and I was just really blown away by how much enjoyment I was able to get out of this little 180-page book. So mad props to Seanan McGuire. I would love to continue this series, and I hope they continue blowing me away like this one did. The next book I want to talk about is also a November read, and that's The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. So this is an adult fantasy following the Gentlemen Bastards, who are this troupe of thieves living in a Venetian-inspired city, reminiscent of like the Renaissance era Venice. So like the good stuff with the masquerades and a little bit of lords and a little bit of dirtiness, you know, good stuff. I knew this was going to be good because it's considered kind of one of those more classic fantasy series, and halfway through I was like, okay, this is good, but I'm not sure where the plot is heading. And then like the last probably 30% of the book, I was just like white knuckling it. I was like, holy shit, shit's going down, things are happening, I'm here for all of it. I didn't expect to be so attached to the characters either. Every plot point ended up making sense, every decision made sense, every character decision, even though you questioned it initially, you were like, okay, this makes sense. It just ended up being really captivating. The story was a lot of fun for such a large book. It was really interesting to read through. I also think that part of the reason I didn't expect much from it was at the beginning. There's kind of a dual timeline, so you're following Locke when he was a young boy and he was orphaned and he was brought to the Gentlemen Bastards initially, and then you follow him as an adult on his current, you know, game where he's trying to swindle someone out of money. And I thought that that was kind of slow, and I wasn't sure, and I know it made sense for the story, but I wasn't sure how I was going to feel if it kept going. But it truly does all make sense. This book really blew me away by how well crafted it was and how much I felt for these damn characters. I think about this book a lot since I've read it, and I absolutely cannot wait to pick up the sequel and continue on with our boys, because like, this book hit me right in the fucking feels, and I'd follow these characters to the ends of the earth now. The next book I want to talk about is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a classic. It is about Dorian Gray, who gets a portrait painted of him, and when he's looking at it, he gets really upset, and he's thinking that, you know, I'm gonna get older, but the portrait will stay the same. How depressing. Bing, bang, boom, some magic happens. He does not age, but his portrait does. But in reality, it was much more than that. When I was going into this, I thought it was going to be more plot heavy, but there's just so much incredible commentary about things like vanity and art and society and our own self-perception and human like tendencies, and it just ended up being an incredible work of art. I have so much stuff tabbed in this book because I found a lot of it just so incredibly relevant even today. Oscar Wilde truly just has a way with words, and while I do enjoy classics. I do often find them, you know, a bit more difficult, and that does sometimes hinder my enjoyment of them. But this was just so accessible, and the writing was so beautiful. Like, there's certain quotes in here that are just so memorable, and I truly, truly, truly think, even if you do not like classics, you really need to give this a shot. I have a feeling it will blow you away, just like it did me. This ended up being a favorite book of all time, which I also did not really expect, but it was just magnificent, beautifully written, and one of the most pleasurable reading experiences I've had in a long time. The next book I want to talk about is The Bonchard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. So this is an adult fantasy debut that came out this year, and it's about this Asian-inspired world where the emperor's daughter is struggling with her identity and how to please her father, who is the emperor. And you also follow a smuggler who is dealing with his own personal things while, you know, running around the empire wreaking havoc. And the world itself is set in this kind of aquatic, I don't want to say aquatic, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a bunch of islands in like a sea, and they all shift and migrate, and the world revolves around people traveling between the islands. And holy shit. Again, I will link where I talked about it. I believe it was in September, and I was just floored by how much this book gripped me. The characters are incredibly written. The writing itself has so much angst and heartbreak, and it's just so beautiful. It's just like, you can taste everything, you can smell everything. The imagery that the author created is just so incredible, and I don't know, I did not expect to absolutely fall for it the way that I did. I did not expect it to have the kind of impact where I'm still thinking about the characters. I truly did not think that it would end up being a favorite, but like it is now. I think it's going to be a favorite of all time. I can't wait for the rest of the series because I need to know what happens to our characters. I don't know if it's because it was a debut, my expectations were subconsciously a little lower, or if it just, I hadn't heard anyone else talk about it. It's not like a Brandon Sanderson book, for example, where everyone's constantly talking about it. So even if it's, you know, a new book that no one's read by him, everyone's still gonna love it. I knew nothing about this going in, and it ended up being absolutely stunning and incredible, and I loved it so much. The next book I want to talk about is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So this is an adult kind of sci-fi fantasy following college roommates Victor and Eli, and they have been trying to experiment and find a way to make themselves extraordinaries, aka basically superheroes. But shit goes sideways and they end up as mortal enemies. And listen, I didn't love A Darker Shade of Magic. I'm so sorry. It was fine. I didn't feel attached to the characters at all. The world was kind of cool, so I will continue with the series, but A Darker Shade of Magic was just such a meh book that I was worried that Vicious wasn't going to be at the level everyone said it was. And on top of that, everyone was constantly saying how morally gray it was, and I was just not sure, because a lot of the times when people say that, it's not quite that way. But goddamn, this was good. The pacing was incredible. I was hooked. I had to like speed through it. The characters were actually quite lovable, and I did feel somewhat connected to them, more so than I had with A Darker Shade of Magic. And I found that the twists were good. Like I said, the pacing was fantastic. The plot, everything was on point with this book, and it kind of reignited my interest in Victoria Schwab for sure. Like, I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I was like shocked by the reveals, and I was like in pain when certain things happen, and I just felt it all. So I'm glad that's the experience I had, not gonna lie. The next book I want to talk about is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This is like a classic YA sci-fi Cinderella retelling in New Beijing, where Cinder is an android and all this stuff happens. And listen, y'all, like, this was a lot of fun. Like, obviously, it's not the highest literary merit novel. It's kind of cheesy. There's some elements that were not great. Obviously, Marissa Meyer writing New Beijing, but there was no, like, world building, no setting. Really, it was a little funky. But it was so much fun, and I, like, sped through it. I feel like these are really good books for when you're in a reading slump, because they're just a lot of fun, and they're fast-paced, and you kind of blow through them, and yeah, they're kind of like cringy YA with the character who isn't pretty, but people still love her. But like, honestly, the love interest in this book was pretty well written, not like a typical asshole brooding male, but he was like really sweet and nice. And even our main heroine had some like interesting things about her that I enjoyed. Like it wasn't bad. And I like, listen, I'll admit it, I thought it was a lot of fun, and I would definitely read the rest of the series. I just expected a little bit less because I was comparing it in my mind to some of like the classic YA dystopian 2012-13 books. You know what I'm talking about. But it surprised me. I actually really quite enjoyed it, and I didn't think it was all that bad in terms of how the plot was set up and the characters. And you know, there was elements to it that were really, really good. So I actually had a really good experience with this. Again, the wrap-up where I talk about this will be linked right up here. The final book I want to talk about is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is a young adult kind of dystopian sci-fi book where a group of girls that go to school on an island are quarantined to that island a year after some kind of outbreak happens. And it's not a typical disease. The girls start growing gills, they start growing scales. Our main character's eyes just swelled shut and she cannot see out of it. There's all sorts of like really funky stuff happening. And listen, when this came out, BookTube kept putting it on like their worst of 2019 or most disappointing or books I didn't love. Fuck me, this was good. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because everyone expected it to be a certain thing and it was a bit more abstract and a bit more artsy than they expected. But so the writing is a little flowery, the writing is a little bit vague, and it is a little distracting in the sense that when you're trying to follow plot, you get a lot of like inner monologues and kind of like side notes and stuff. But I thought that this was so incredible in terms of the atmosphere. I thought that the body horror was done so tastefully. I thought that the imagery that the author gave you was fantastic. The weakest point was like characters and the kind of romance subplot. It wasn't my favorite thing, but in terms of like the action and the actual like kind of body horror, this was incredible and I fucking loved it. This book was a lot better than I thought it was gonna be because everyone kept hyping it to be shit. So I don't trust any of you anymore. That's all I'm saying. And read this book if you haven't. You should absolutely give it a shot because it was so much fun. God damn. All right, friends, that's it for my most surprising books of 2020. Let me know if you had any reads that you thought were going to be garbage but ended up being good. As usual, my social media is linked down below, so you can always give me a shout there, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.